Hello and welcome to Neuroshambles, the podcast that aims to shine a light into some of the murkier corners of what it's like to parent neurodivergent kids. I'm Mark Allen, and every episode I'm going to be swapping stories with my guests about some of the frankly ludicrous nonsense we have to deal with on a daily basis. So, if you're anything like me and you're feeling frazzled, overwhelmed and pretty much an outcast from polite society, join me. Hello and welcome to episode 32 of Neuroshambles. Once again, it's an absolute joy to have you back aboard, Neuroshamblers. Thanks for joining me. This is one of those episodes where you can actually hear me kind of connecting the dots. You know, sometimes I'll speak to a guest and I'll go, oh, wow, so that's why my child does that. It's always a bit of an eye-opener. So this is one of those episodes. So as well as talking to my fabulous guest about this week's topic of the week, we've also got some neurodiversity champions, some tiny epic wins, and, of course, somewhat the flip moments. So let's get stuck in.
Meet the guest.
So this week's guest is someone I've admired for quite a while now because he regularly produces entertaining and thought-provoking content on the socials, and I also recently listened to his excellent book, Untypical. So I really wanted to get him on the podcast to share his experiences. As well as being an author and obviously a parent of an autistic child, he is also a tutor, a conference speaker, and a prolific advocate for the neurodivergent community. So I am delighted to be able to welcome aboard to Neuroshambles. It's Pete Wharmby. How you doing, Pete?
Hello. Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Yep, just relaxing on this relatively grey day.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, before we launch into it, it's useful for the listeners to have an understanding of your setup and which neurodivergencies you're dealing with there. So, can you just enlighten us, please?
Yeah, of course. In my household, as it were, I obviously am autistic and ADHD. I was diagnosed late with both of those things. I've got the one child, a daughter, who is currently undiagnosed, but I am absolutely certain that she's certainly autistic.
If anyone's going to know, it's going to be you, right? You
Well,
do a lot of thinking about this.
I would hope so. I'd hope I'd be able to recognise it if it was, slap bang in my face like that. But she's very similar to me in terms of her autistic traits, her autistic presentation. Whether or not she's ADHD, I'm still a bit on the fence with, to be quite honest. As anyone knows who's got ADHD in the family or for themselves, it's really difficult to unpick the various strands and to identify those little bits, because autism and ADHD interact in such interesting ways. But she certainly displays some traits which I would associate with ADHD. She's 9 years old. And she's quite mature for a 9-year-old too. Well, we've had a very, very open discussion, throughout her conscious life, really, ever since she was quite young. Because I was diagnosed when she was only 2.
Right.
So basically the entirety of her life that she remembers, she's had an autistic person in the household. So we've always talked very openly about it. We laugh about it a lot. We are self-deprecating in that way that, I certainly am. And she is too. We spend a lot of time on the drive home from school, for example, kind of exploring and discussing the politics that she's experienced that day.
Okay.
The kind of playground social interactions that she hasn't followed and hasn't quite got.
I don't know how you would have an answer to that either, though. It's a mystery out there.
Yeah, often I just throw my hands up. But sometimes, age and experience, even when you're autistic, age and experience does work for something. I can at least kind of give her my take on things. Yeah. And
also, sometimes saying, I don't know, is actually enough. You're not wrong to be confused by that.
Exactly.
That is insane.
It validates her a lot, I think. So yeah, it's a really positive thing.
All right, well, thanks for introducing us to your setup. Well, there is a lot to cover in this one, and I'm very excited to kind of get into the weeds on this and work out what's going on. So let's just crack on with it.
What's the topic of the week?
So this week's topic is something that I've touched on a lot in Neuroshambles, and that is the issue of masking. So hardly an episode goes by without either me or one of my esteemed guests alluding to it in some way or another, because it's something that undoubtedly affects the vast majority of our kids, I would say. So I thought it warranted a closer look in a dedicated episode so we can give it the attention it deserves. So firstly, let's start with the easy bit. What is masking?
Well, you say easy bit.
I mean, easier than some of the other stuff we're going to get into.
True. Well, when I first started talking about this stuff, back in 2019 or whenever it was, before the pandemic, I thought masking was relatively straightforward. And I think, it's often presented as such. It's this idea that it's autistic people having to present as neurotypical in order to pass through life without getting too much negative attention, which is a big part of what masking is, but it's also not the whole story. There are other aspects of it. There are other things going on when it comes to masking, which we'll undoubtedly go into. And I don't want to kind of talk about all of it now, but that is a big part of it. It is a self-defense mechanism that we utilize to stop ourselves getting bullied, harassed, treated poorly, that kind of thing. But it can also be a, not so much a choice, but a more conscious thing where autistic people don't just mask being autistic in terms of how we communicate. We also mask being autistic in every other way. And of course, a big part of being autistic is our sensory difference. So, things being too bright, too loud, too smelly, too whatever. And I think actually that a lot of masking is to do with that. I think much of the time, autistic people have to mask their discomfort. And autistic children, autistic adults will mask how much they are affected by their environment because they know that it's not something that's shared by the people around them because they're probably not autistic and therefore aren't that sensitive. And therefore, if they do complain, they will just get ignored or told that it's nothing. Or I call it the don't be daft problem, which is where we say, it's too noisy in here, it's too bright, there's too many people. And the neurotypical person looks around and they're like, no, it's not.
It's not a problem for me.
It's fine. Don't be so silly. You're making a big deal out of this. You're being a drama. You're making a big thing here. And we get told that all the way through. So that becomes part of the mask, I think. The number of times as a child that I sat through the most uncomfortable situation, and I'm not talking like social discomfort, I'm talking proper physical discomfort, because I knew that I had no choice.
And people would have dismissed you had you raised anything.
Yes, I knew that from experience. So I would force myself to sit through and to just grit my teeth. And looking back, now that I'm more okay with myself and now that I have my own autonomy, I would never do that to myself now, unless I really had to. Looking back, I think, my God, that was horrible.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, what's interesting, you're sort of bringing it to the neurotypicals, and because I think everybody, to a degree, neurotypicals and neurodivergents, exhibit some element of chameleoning.
Oh, of course, yes.
And it's important to kind of emphasise the distinction between that. So, for example, if I'm having a meal with my parents, I'm going to be different. I'm going to not burp and swear. I'm not going to order tequila for the table, right? Whereas if I'm with my mates, those things are likely to be on the cards. Maybe,
of course,
maybe not
yes.
the burping.
I let it all hang out. But you're right, yeah. Well, we have to remember that there is very little about being autistic that is unique to autistic people. And masking is no exception. Masking is, a form of masking is something that all human beings do. We often call it code switching, which is a kind of linguistic or sociological term to do with people, as you say, having a different way of being when they're with different people. That is fundamentally similar to masking. The way that I always like to make it clear to people is that one of the key times that anyone will mask is during a really high tension, high stress situation, like an interview is probably the best example.
Right.
A work interview, pretty much everyone on the planet will mask for that. You have to. You have to put on that professional demeanour. You're probably not like that normally, but also you've got that desire to impress. You've got that desire to stand out. So you paint a face on.
Also, you're like, what do they want from me? You're thinking about that all the time.
Absolutely. And this is such a fundamental part of human existence that we have lots of phrases about this. We talk about wearing a smile. We talk about trying to fit in. These are basically relating to masking. So interviews happen, but the thing is, when a neurotypical person gets home from an interview, or indeed the moment they leave the building, or even the moment they leave the room, what do? They go...
breathe a massive sigh of relief.
Oh, thank God for that. Yeah, shoulders drop, big deep breath, a sigh. You get home, you take your suit off.
Yeah, exactly. Get your shirt and tie off immediately.
Exactly. You take your shoes off, you put your pajamas on, you go back to you. The point I always like to make to neurotypicals who are seeking to join the dots here is, okay, so I kind of know how that... For autistic people, we are doing that interview always.
Yeah, okay.
The number of times we actually get in any given day to actually do that whole deep breath, slump shoulders, change into our PJs, well, probably not that much. Certainly for a child, they will be feeling that interview style pressure the entirety of the school day.
This is it. I mean, this is kind of brings us to why our kids mask, and it is that being in the school environment is incredibly dysregulating, and there are so many rules and expectations that they're kind of expected to conform to, particularly if they're not diagnosed as well. And there's no accommodations made, and a lot of it is to do with meeting those social expectations.
Well, I always say that social expectations are they are the nemesis of the autistic person. That is the crux of it. We are fine when there are no social expectations. Well, relatively anyway. So, I'm fine on my own, or I'm fine around other autistic people, or even I'm relatively fine around neurotypical people who have booked me for a talk because they know I'm autistic, because they know I'm autistic. I can be in fact, in many ways, the more I let it all hang out, the better, because they're like, oh, wow, we're really getting the authentic experience here.
I love it. Look, he's stimming.
look, yeah, look at him go. And that's kind of that's something that I'm very lucky to have. I can be openly different, and it's actually almost a boon to me. Whereas for pretty much every child in school, being openly autistic is going to be a difficult thing.
Yes, because other people's understanding of autism is vague, if at best.
I think.
And kids can be particularly unforgiving as well, I think, with difference.
Yes, they can.
Well,
they can,
okay, so they used to be. I'm hoping it's changing. But back in my day...
I can forgive the kids.
Yeah.
I can forgive a kid who is mean to an autistic kid, because they're a kid and they don't know better. It's the adults. They're the problem. Now, don't get me wrong, being bullied and having, the peer pressure and all that from kids being nasty is real. And I'm not saying for a moment that that's not harmful. It is. But I don't blame the kids as much as I blame the adults in the situation. I've worked in schools. I was a teacher for 15 years. A school has a culture, and the culture is formed by the adults in that culture. Yeah. And that will affect how the kids treat difference. So for me, yes, it always comes down to the adults. And I remember there was something that I heard an autistic advocate, Alexis Quinn, say. She said that being different and being bullied, but it's not just the kids. The adults are just as bad. Yeah. And that stuck with me. And that's something I've seen, from time in schools.
Yeah, which is horrendous, because literally they're teachers. You're supposed to be teaching, not just the lesson, but actually respect and understanding and acceptance.
But it's not even so much that they're teaching, it's just the adult world generally. The human adult world, in the society that we have at the moment, just can't cope with the difference that autistic people provide.
Which is exactly why our kids mask, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they know
they have to.
There's an element of them not being accepted in their true form, if you like, in their authentic selves. And
absolutely,
just to kind of go back to the societal expectations thing, that society has these unwritten rules.
Yes.
So many unwritten rules that don't come naturally to neurodivergents, because largely they don't really make sense, right?
Well, exactly. I think the jury is still out as to exactly what's going on there when it comes to, why neurodivergent, autistic people in particular, don't respond to these unwritten rules. Some people think it's because we're naturally anarchical, that we don't really care for rules, but then there's plenty of evidence to suggest that we actually quite like rules.
No, absolutely, yeah.
I personally think it's ambiguity. I think autistic people shun ambiguity. I think we hate ambiguity.
Well, you need clarity because of these unwritten rules.
Exactly.
Weirdly, it's like, if you tell me what the rules are, I can either work out, what you're expecting from me and follow them, or tell you why they're absolutely wrong. But either way, give me something to pin this on.
Yes. And kids in school have this consistently throughout their school life. There are the rules around who's allowed to talk. One of the most confusing things for me as a kid was the fact that there seemed to be different hierarchies for who was allowed to talk in any given situation. Right. Both in class with teachers, whereby some kids would get away with talking, other kids wouldn't, and I never understood why. But also in friendship groups, where some people seem to be more important than others.
Yes.
And that's really confusing. The fact that every friendship group seems to have a kind of leader,
Yeah.
a kind of a head honcho of some kind, is something that I don't think autistic people, if you imagine like having an autistic kind of group of people somewhere, I think it's probably fair to say that it might not stratify in the same way as neurotypical people do.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. This is purely hypothetical and kind of my own thoughts, but I suspect that the natural stratification that happens in neurotypical groups, whereby a kind of leader and a deputy and, grunts kind of develop, like sedimentary deposits at the bottom of a river. Autistic people are thrown by that and confused by it because I don't think we do that. I don't think we are prone as much to that. I think we are more tending towards the egalitarian of just all being on the same kind of level. Maybe because none of us want to take charge, because that's a horrible thing to have to do. I don't know. You've got to be careful because I'm generalising, but it's a very fascinating thing. But it's an unwritten rule that autistic kids in particular struggle with. It's one of those things that I talked to my daughter about on the drive home.
Yes.
Who's
the top dog?
Yeah, this whole thing of there being alphas, of being bossy people who are somehow at the top of the social ladder. Very, very strange.
Yeah, that is just one of the set of social rules that autistic children have to navigate. But also there's the typical expectations like eye contact, for example. You have to make eye contact to show you're listening.
Yep.
And I know that if Otto, who's my middle child, he hates making eye contact. And I know that at school, he's asked to make eye contact to show that he's listening, even though they know it's an instinct. I do it myself sometimes as well, which I immediately kind of have to correct myself because, he's also ADHD. So his mind is, he's very easily distracted. So I ask him to look at me to prove he's listening. But, if you're doing that in school and he finds it physically uncomfortable, then he's masking.
He is, and it's taking a toll. And we have to remember, it's interesting because you said about it being instinctive. Only here. There are plenty of places in the world where eye contact is not required.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Oh, yes. There are cultures where making eye contact with somebody will be seen as being disrespectful or too much, and it's important to note just how much of this is just normalised by our particular culture.
So kind of Western expectations.
Western, maybe even just British. In some respect, some communication cultural differences are purely British. Like the overuse of negative politeness, for example, which is the technical term for when we say things like, if it's not too much trouble, could you possibly? Where we try to minimise the impact we're having on someone.
Yeah, I'm terribly sorry, but you're standing on my foot.
Exactly, yes. I'm really sorry, and I hate to ask, but I really must ask, and I really do. I feel terrible. It's the Hugh Grant thing. It's that juddering kind of, I'm so sorry, but. And that is certainly a British thing. It does exist in other cultures too. But, French people, German people, Dutch people, Americans look at us with kind of, I think they find it quite cute.
And conversely, I find it quite thrilling to meet a Dutch person.
Oh, God, yeah. They
because
don't
they're
care.
so direct. and Germans as well. They find a very just matter of fact about what they want. They're very direct. And that's quite nice. And I think that sort of feeds into the autistic brain as well, right? It's like, finally you're saying what you want.
It raises the fascinating issue of, is it easier to be autistic in some different countries?
Yeah.
Which is really, something that I'd love to look more into.
Or are all Germans autistic?
Indeed. God, don't go that.
Just to be clear, I'm not actually saying that.
God, imagine. But yeah, it's going back to the earlier point about the eye contact. I think it would be good for neurotypicals to actually just take a step back and really self-interrogate themselves as to why they expect these things. When the teacher says, "Did you have a good weekend?" and a child explains in detail why they didn't, that is a social rule broken.
Yes.
But that's not something that has to be. We are often enslaved to our social expectations, neurotypicals as well, and that's what causes so many problems. If people were just a little bit more able to free themselves a bit from that and just be a bit more able to deal with the unexpected and things that weren't quite what we did expect, then autistic people would have a much nicer time.
But when faced with a question like that of like, how was your weekend?
Yes.
For me, as an undiagnosed neurotypical, it's not something that causes me dissonance, right? It's just like, yeah, fine, it was nice. I might give one detail of something that I did, just so that I go, look, that's the thing. We've just been friendly. Now we can go about our business, right? But for a neurodivergent person, there's a whole like, oh fuck, what do they want? How much detail do they want?
Yes.
It sets off
Yes.
the cogs, right, of trying to work out what does this person want from me and how well do I know them, and
All that overthinking that autistic people in particular do get in that moment stems from the simple fact that we know we're going to have to lie. Mm-hmm. And as anyone who's ever had to lie knows, that comes with a big side order of overthinking. You know, if you have to tell a lie, you overthink it. You wonder how you're going to come across. The moment somebody says to you, especially as an autistic child, how was your weekend? If that child has experienced this game before, they will know they have to lie. They know that they can't just tell the truth. They know they can't tell their truth. Mm-hmm. Their truth could well be that they want to say, well, actually, we did this on the Friday night. I didn't really enjoy that. On the Saturday, we did this, which was actually quite good fun. I'd like to do that again. And on Sunday, I did all this and it was brilliant. And let me now tell you all about it.
Yeah.
They know they can't do that, even though that would be a rational response to the question.
Yes.
So they start to overthink because they know they're going to have to tell a falsehood. They're going to have to say something, or at the very least, be very, very vague and ambiguous, which is something, as I said, we don't like. So we are immediately thinking, oh God, I'm going to come unstuck here. I'm going to get this wrong. Oh God, I got this wrong before and it was awful.
Yeah.
And that person doesn't even talk to me anymore.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because they're so used to having negative experiences as a result of them being more authentic, let's say, they're learning from an early age that their natural reaction isn't right. And that's the thing that makes it, like, for me with my kids and stuff, that's what makes it quite difficult for me as a parent to think, how many tiny interactions have you had where you've been corrected or you've been perceived as wrong or you've been treated as wrong?
Yes.
And how much that impacts them, just, you know, incrementally, bit by bit, until they're building up this armor. Because when they're 4 or 5 year olds, there's no expectations on them. They're cute because they're just kind of a bit bonkers and a bit different, and that's really nice. But over time, this armor has to build up to stay away this dissonance of like, I'm other. And that's a really, as a parent, that's quite a hard thing to have to watch.
It is. And it brings us to another key aspect of masking, which is the fact that it is a trauma response, fundamentally. Because, all of these little, you know, micro moments throughout their life where they are told they're wrong, they're told they're strange, people back away from them, people just stop talking to them, people give a kind of forced smile and are just kind of looking at them quizzically. All of that builds up.
Yeah.
You know, and from a very early age, you recognise that there's something wrong with. I mean, I'm using hand quotes here. There's something wrong with you, which means that you second guess everything you say. You come to fear social interaction because things go wrong unexpectedly. Often for autistic people, much of our anxiety that we have, I mean, as we all know, autistic people have anxiety a lot. A lot of that comes from our experience of unexpected criticism.
Yeah.
That just kind of flies in from nowhere. I always give the example of the debrief after a social event. And I had this as a kid, where you'd go to a social event and you'd leave it thinking, oh, you know what, I did all right there. I
smashed
coped,
that one.
You know, I smashed that. And then somebody comes up to you and says, why the hell did you say that? And you're like, what? Why did you make that point? And you're like, whoa, what did I do? And you get a kind of offloading of all the things you actually did wrong without even realising it.
Really?
That has an impact.
Yeah, of course.
You know, like if you have that throughout your childhood and teenage years, you are screwed for life. You need therapy.
Yeah. Because you go into situations going, I don't want to.
I am going to mess this up.
So that's when you introduce the strategies.
Exactly.
You make eye contact, you shut the fuck up, laugh along to everyone's jokes and get the hell out of there as quickly as you can.
Well, this is why autistic people have a general reputation for being antisocial. It's long been believed that autistic people are naturally solitary animals, that, you know, we don't need people. And that's nonsense. We do. I mean, I don't. I am naturally solitary, like some people are. But actually, a lot of autistic people can be quite gregarious, quite outgoing, extroverts even. But you're not anymore because you've had that possibly even literally beaten out of you.
Yes, but conversely, if you are hanging out with another group of neurodivergents,
It can be great.
You drop the pretense, right? You drop the mask because you know.
Or you try to, at least, yes.
Yeah, I'm obviously not speaking on behalf of autistics, but my understanding is you're going in with a level playing field because you're leaving the conscious social expectations at the door. There may well still be some inherent conforming to social expectations that you might not even be aware of.
Yeah, we know from studies done at the University of Edinburgh that the autistic people's communication with each other is actually pretty sound and, it's pretty good. But there is a fly in the ointment, which is that by the time a kid gets to, I don't know, like 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, they have already learned the hard way about things like, people don't say what they mean.
Yeah.
People actually lie and they actually mean one thing when they mean the other. Now, the effect that has then when they talk to other autistic people is they're conditioned to expect that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So when an autistic person is totally blunt with them, which is ostensibly what they want, they're conditioned to expect doublespeak. They're conditioned to expect there to be some kind of underlying subtext. There isn't because they're talking to another autistic person.
Yeah.
But they're still waiting for it. And that can cause massive problems in autistic relationships. Because you're so conditioned to talk to neurotypicals that when you finally get to talk to another autistic person, you're still screwed because you've been conditioned into expecting something that you're not going to get. So, in my experience, autistic people spend a long time saying to each other, there is no subtext. I am saying what I'm saying. And the other person's like, I know, but I can't help it, because we get trained, harshly to expect it. It really is a mess. It's such a mess.
I wanted to kind of touch on some of the strategies that people use to mask because there are so many different ones.
Yes.
And I think they largely fall into three broad sections. So firstly, there's like concealing their own natural traits.
Yes.
Which is like, you stop stimming, for example.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
you minimise your stimming, or you decide not to really launch into your soliloquy about your special interest, even though you really want to.
Absolutely.
And the eye contact thing we've got.
Yeah.
And again, it's a way of fitting in as well, because they know that if they exhibit these traits, then they're not accepted. Facial expressions as well, controlling facial expressions.
Oh, yes.
That's quite a big one, isn't it? Because if someone's not interested in what you got to say, you have to pretend.
Yes, absolutely, and also, of course, your facial expressions might not match what you actually are feeling. That's a relatively common thing for autistic people. I often make the point, especially when I'm talking, giving speeches and stuff, about Christmas morning being a real problem for that. Where you get a gift that you love. You're so happy that mum and dad got you an N64. I'm not. I'm talking from experience here. You're so over the moon and you've opened it and you're happy as hell, and your mum turns, "Are you okay? Is that what you wanted?" And you're like, "Yeah. I'm really happy." No, you can't see this because this is a auditory medium, but I just pulled a very basic flat deadpan face, and that can cause real issues because people just don't know what's going on there, and they get very confused. So a lot of autistic people, when they realise this, we can actually be quite exaggerated in our facial. I think I do this. I'm really expressive to try to make up for that.
Yeah, I think Jay, my oldest, does that sometimes where he's we're having a conversation and he's finding it funny, but he really goes over the top to kind of just this maniacal laugh like an absolute maniac.
That's a kid finding their level, isn't it? What they're doing is they're calibrating it. They're in the middle of doing that. They'll land on the correct amount soon.
At some point, but at the moment it sounds like... But I like it because it is like he is feeling it.
Yes,
he's feeling he wants to share that he's enjoying this moment. But it's not natural to him at the moment. The level to which he needs to do that. It's interesting because I don't think that Jay masks much at all, which is quite interesting to me because I don't think all autistic kids do mask.
No,
I mean Jay is the typical example of this in that he just will speak his mind. And he'll, even if it's not very complimentary, especially if it's not very complimentary, actually, he will just come out with it, which I love. And part of the reason that Jay gives me so much joy is because he's so authentic, and he doesn't sugarcoat anything, and he's got this wonderful use of language, and he's just very funny. But it can be a problem.
Yes, yeah.
Because people expect masking. And I went to, he's really into Greek mythology. And I went to this workshop day, which was about Greek mythology. There was a bit of kind of Greek mythology storytelling in the morning. And it was a group which was pretty much full of autistic kids. So I was like, great, I've got his special interest. I've got people who understand him, and he's going to have a good time. You know, it's not been very easy to get him doing external activities lately because he's just emerging from the grimy burrow of burnout, you know. And so this was a thing, it's like, great, we can go out, we can do this together. Fantastic. And he did not mask at all. And I was just going, please, just rein it in a bit, because someone said something about a Greek tale, and they got a detail, I won't say wrong, because it's Greek mythology, right? There are different versions, but it was to him, it was wrong because it was not the version that he knew, and he was so rude to this kid. It was mortifying because, and I was like, just rein it in a little bit, and he doesn't have that, and part of me is like, I'm kind of glad that he's authentic, but also he could do with brushing up on a little bit of masking just to employ it when he needs it.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue, isn't it? Because you're right. You know, not masking can lead to a black eye ultimately, can't it? You know, it can lead to being ostracized, being treated poorly. So yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that dynamic many times.
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
an autistic person being just really authentically them, and it comes across as rude but there's two aspects here. One aspect is a kind of societal thing, which I don't really expect to change. But it is interesting to take a step back and just kind of think, what is rude? Like, it's interesting because there is a problem, I think, in society of people not being told that they're wrong. There's a statement. Yeah. But because there is this fear of, you know, coming across as rude. But that's by the by. The other thing to bear in mind is that I actually fundamentally agree with you that autistic kids can actually benefit from being taught how to do this, but there are massive provisos here.
Yes.
Because I don't want to get attacked by my own community. I'm not suggesting here, for example, anything to do with ABA or enforced masking at all.
Oh, God,
what I prefer the idea of is for autistic people to be kind of taught neurotypical as a foreign language.
Okay, I like it. Yeah.
You know, it's not secret. There's no secret behind it. It's taught like that, you know, a kind of, right then, you know, what we're going to do today, we're going to learn that neurotypical people, for whatever reason, don't like being told they're wrong. So when they are wrong, and you want to tell them they're wrong because it's important
and
that we're right about
they
things.
need to correct themselves.
There are maybe things that you've got to do and things you've got to say to make that happen. That kind of thing.
Yes.
I think. And conversely, of course, because it's got to be fair, neurotypical people should also be taught how neurodivergent people work.
I love this as an idea. This is something when I was talking to Kieran Rose about conversations.
I can imagine he was.
But I like the idea of having lessons where it's like, look, here as a neurodivergent, here is how I like to communicate.
Yeah.
And then the neurotypicals chip in, and there's almost a sort of a shared dialogue about differences.
Yeah. A fascination, because it is fascinating, genuinely. And I've always found, a little bit like with my daughter, where we openly talk about this stuff, it gets rid of the taboo, it gets rid of that feeling of inadequacy, it just makes it all feel perfectly normal and natural. And a world where neurodivergent people, autistic people in particular, were explicitly taught neurotypical ways of communicating, whilst simultaneously being told that their neurodivergent style is absolutely valid and that is their natural language. I think that would be great. What tends to happen is neurodivergent people are basically taught that they're wrong.
Yeah.
And that neurotypical ways are correct, which is arrogant in a way that I can barely even explore. You know, it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
Neurotypical people, what is your deal? Like, you know, there's not only one way.
I think it's more presumptuous than anything.
There's
this massive presumption that everyone is neurotypical, and now it's starting to work out. You know, the more you look into it, the more you're like, actually, there's way more neurodivergent people out there than we thought. And you know, like you say, let's have that conversation. I love the idea of treating it as a foreign language. I think in Afghanistan, if you put the thumbs up to someone, it's like deeply offensive because it's like
absolutely.
up yours. Like,
it's a culture.
So you need to know that before you go there. So you would approach these lessons with that in mind of like, okay, so how am I going to navigate this different culture? And to have that interesting conversation, I think would be really beneficial in schools, like from that age.
From the very beginning. Teachers and even nursery workers have to just rise up to and wake up to the fact that they are working with large numbers of neurodivergent kids of various different neurodivergencies, way more than they would ever have thought. And that therefore explicit and very clear teaching of this stuff to the teachers, as part of their training is vital. They need to know this. And what that would do is it wouldn't eradicate masking at all, because fundamentally, of course, masking is human and there would still be some need for it, a lot of the time. But it would certainly take the sting out. And it would mean that autistic people could be more openly themselves, because not only can they, presumably if they've been taught this stuff, code switch to neurotypical when they need to, in a way that is still maintains the integrity of their true selves, but they would be around people who understood them in turn.
Yeah, I like this idea of code switching. It's really interesting.
Yes.
I've not thought of it like that. But but social, we're playing by different rules in this situation.
Exactly. But the problem is that historically it's been the autistic person's job to do all of that switching.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was more egalitarian, where neurotypical people had to code switch too.
Yeah, from my point of view, as a alleged neurotypical, I do that all the time now, because if I'm aware I'm speaking to someone who's autistic, I will make those accommodations, and it's not a hardship. It's just because I know, because I've done the learning, and
Yeah, you stop eye contact. You are more open to longer turn taking. Typically autistic people will talk, as you probably noticed with me. We will talk much longer. I think that's why autistic people can be great interview guests, because we don't tend to. We can really go and go and go.
It's an editing nightmare, though, Pete.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I always like to encourage neurotypical people to try it out. Say to a neurotypical person, that hobby you like. Have you ever really tried to explain it in detail to a friend? Because it's flipping brilliant. It's lovely to do that. Give it a try. See if you like it. Small talk. Why bother? Why don't you go a whole day without using small talk
go big
and see
talk.
how it feels?
Go big, guys.
Straight to big talk and see how that feels. Just get rid of this air of mystery and deficiency and medicalization away from all of it, and just be like, look, this is just a different way of doing it. Would be great, in my opinion.
So back to the strategies that people use, because there's obviously this conversation is. That's what I love about Neuroshambles, is that we sort of follow little conversational bridle ways, and then we come back to the main path. So the other strategy that people use, apart from just concealing their own traits, which is difficult to do, but there's an awareness that they need to do it. There's also faking it, which is this sort of, as we're talking about with Jay, laughter as a social lubricant, just to look, I'm enjoying this, or small talk, as you've alluded to, having to try to be interested in how someone's weekend was, and pretending to understand things when you're, if you're having a conversation, or do you get that, and you just go, yeah, because I can't be bothered to say no.
Yeah. Or you daren't say no because your past experience has taught you that asking clarifying questions is not okay.
Right, okay.
Don't know what the deal is with neurotypical people, but they don't like that.
Yeah.
They really don't. It's weird. It's like, I learned from an early age not to ask any questions, just to, I got it. I understand.
That's heartbreaking to hear, because I know that, you're talking about your experience, but our kids are going through this all the time, right?
My daughter's terrified of it. She will always just kind of nod and be like, yeah, okay.
And I know Otto has that in school as well. I said, did you do, any schoolwork today? Because it's not a given, even though he's in school at the moment. And he was like, no. And I said, well, why? And he went into the class and they were doing something, he didn't understand it. And I said, well, you could ask. And he's like, no, he didn't want to ask. Because again, I think there's that fear of the disapproval, or also fear of making yourself stand out, because everyone else gets it. So why am I the one that doesn't get it? So I'll just keep my head down and then not do the work. And so just pretending that you're getting on is problematic.
I never forget. It still reverberates in my brain today, but I was in year 5, I think. So I would have been, 9 years old? Same age as my daughter is now. Mm-hmm. I was working through my maths textbook. We did gin maths, it was called.
Okay.
Different colour books for your ability.
Right.
Just to really highlight to the other kids how bad you were. And I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't followed the instructions because they were too complicated. And like a lot of autistic people, like, for example, I can't do Twister. I can't do yoga. I can't do anything which involves somebody telling me instructions step by step. I just start to fall apart.
Right, okay.
So I was sitting there with my maths book, just kind of vaguely ashamed that I was getting nothing done. The teacher came up to me and started shouting at me, "What are you doing? What on earth are you doing? You're not getting any work done." And I was like, I didn't know what I was meant to do. And I daren't ask because, as we can see, you're a psycho and you're scary. And she was really cross with me. And honestly, that sticks in my head even today. There was this fear, and I think there is a fear of asking those clarifying questions.
Yeah.
So part of our mask is, as you say, faking it. Yeah, okay, I'm fine, I'm good. But we're not. We don't know. We don't understand. And we are just told over and over again, basically asking a clarifying question seems to be shorthand for, I wasn't listening, I don't care about you, I don't value you. That's how neurotypical people seem to respond, like we're saying that.
Yeah.
When we're not. We're literally just saying, I wasn't following, please explain again.
Yes. Exactly, but yeah, I know, and
that's not how it's taken.
And I get part of the issue is being in school because school is a difficult environment. Like teachers have a fucking hard job. Like it's you've got 30 kids there. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, so you've got 30 kids there, and you all got to get them through this curriculum, and you've got to hit these points for the majority of them. So someone asking those kind of questions is going to slow the group down. So I get why, but I mean, that's why the whole of education needs to change, right?
That's the trouble.
That's more than one podcast topic's worth.
Yes.
I just wanted to touch on a couple of other masking strategies with faking it. Scripting conversations is an interesting one. Yeah. Of trying to think through how that conversation's gonna go so that you can then think of an appropriate response. I don't know if that's necessarily one with our kids employ at this age. Did you do that when you were kind of little?
Oh, I did.
Okay.
I did, yeah, and I think my daughter does to an extent. It's often something that non-autistic people struggle to understand. I think they imagine us kind of literally writing a script, but what I always invite non-autistic people to do is imagine the last time that they had to make a really difficult phone call with somebody who's quite tricky, like, I don't know, a solicitor or a lawyer or a doctor or something which was high stakes, high pressure, and you had to get it right. An interview, And actually, I think you'll find a lot of non-autistic people do script responses and conversations for an interview.
Yeah,
it's a media trope. You see it in films and TV shows. You see the person kind of going to and fro, kind of right, and then they'll say this, and then I'll say this, and then they'll say that.
I'm laughing about this because obviously, we're having a chat about stuff, but I've scripted a lot of this, not like this whole conversation, because it's important to me, and I want to make sure that there's that I get all of the points that I want to kind of talk about. So
absolutely,
it is scripted.
Again, it's not an autistic thing. We do it more because for us, every conversation is that high pressure and that high stress.
Yes, okay.
For neurotypical people, they don't need to worry about this because most conversations are fairly low stakes. They're not going to get told that they're horrible or rude or blunt or weird every single time they open their mouths, whereas we do. So we script everything to try to avoid that. Again, it became medicalized. It became a kind of symptom of autism. We script obsessively, in our little burrows, kind of. And it's like, no, it's not like that. We are doing it for very clear, logical reasons that you should be able to empathize with.
Yes, trying to minimise minimise things for you. It'd be good if you could just kind of go and go, like, this is my part, and then hand a script to the other person, and they go, right, let's play this out where I get the job.
Yes, exactly. Yes. In many ways, the fact that we feel that we have to do that with our friends is more of an indictment on how we're treated than it is on just being autistic. If we feel the need to do that, even with our nearest and dearest, well, it's because of how we've been treated in the past.
Yeah, and I guess the question then is, firstly, are they the wrong friends if you find yourself having to do that? But secondly, it's like, actually, I'm sure that if you were more authentic and didn't have to kind of mask around them, they would be accepting.
Hopefully.
And so, that's how you work out. That's the litmus test, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And then,
it really is.
And I'm sure, a lot of the times I've spoken to people on this podcast, I've been worried about my kids friendships, ability to make friends and stuff.
Yeah.
But people have reassured me that when they get older, they find their little group of people that they're comfortable with, and they don't have to mask as much, and it becomes better. They don't have to adopt this persona, because again, that's the thing. Another facet of this faking it thing is like, I'm going to pretend to be a person that is acceptable in this group, and that's I see my kids without the mask, and they're fucking excellent. They are hilarious, and they're absolutely like wildly creative and interesting and full on, but just full of joy. And so the thought of them going out there and being different humans is really sad to me.
Yeah, it is. Masking is a deadener. It's a bit like an antidepressant. You have to saw off all your edges. Your
spiky bits.
Fitting yourself. Yeah, your spiky, your interesting bits. You're smoothing them all down, and you're turning yourself into a, human 2.0. Just an acceptable human, and so much is lost in that process. And by the time you get to my age, and you've done it all your life, how much of that loss is permanent?
Yeah.
Because that's something we do need to touch on, the after effects of all of this.
Yes.
Masking is not free. It doesn't come without any bad outcomes, and how much of all this stuff that we have to, sand off and break off and saw off is gone forever.
Yeah.
Or very hard to get back. And that's a tragedy, in my opinion. Yeah, that's absolutely. Really sad.
Yeah, we'll dig into that further, because I think that's really interesting. The final kind of set of strategies I think people use, it's perfectly valid. It's just avoiding shit that they don't want to do. Avoiding large social, those situations that are going to make me want to mask. You know what? I'm not going to go to that birthday party because it's in a club, and obviously that's not relating to our kids. My kids are not going clubbing, so maybe that was the wrong analogy. But they avoid situations that are going to cause them to mask, because masking is essentially causing dissonance. So they're going to want to step away from that. So
it's why they avoid school. It's why they don't want to go to school. Any adults in the situation that approach school refusal without bearing this in mind are going to be barking up the wrong tree.
Yes.
That you have to take into account the masking and how desirable it is to avoid that. Like, before I do anything like this that I'm doing now with you, I will have a time period whereby I will be vaguely panicking and wondering whether I can cancel. Before I do anything, work, podcasts, speeches, interviews, because I know that I will have to mask, and I would rather not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
But sometimes it does win, and sometimes I have been known, and I feel bad about it. But I also want to go on record to say that, sometimes I do cancel for this reason. I haven't got the energy.
You need to prioritize yourself.
Yeah, and I feel dreadful, but ultimately, what can I do? I've got to survive.
Yeah.
But kids, of course, I have the autonomy to do that as a self-employed, relatively, I'm doing all right. I've got books and stuff. Yeah. I've got that autonomy. I can make these decisions. Kids don't have that. A kid at school cannot just decide to take a break and not bother with that homework because they're too exhausted.
Yes.
And that... Sorry, I always go off on one, but this is one of the problems with schools saying, well, we have to get them ready for the real world. It's like, no, because actually when they leave school and they become adults, they have more autonomy.
Yeah. The real world's different now anyway. Real world now has remote working. That wasn't
exactly.
a thing.
9 times out of 10, the work that I'm doing is for corporations and businesses who want to know how to better treat their autistic employees. I do 10 times more of that than I do the equivalent for schools.
Yeah.
The work-related world, the adult world, is way ahead of schools on this.
Yes.
They are on top of this, and schools sitting back saying, well, we've got to get them ready. We can't be coddling them. We've got to get them prepared. No, you are traumatizing them.
Well, preparing them for the trauma of life out in the real world. Though. Maybe.
And what they might experience as adults. I mean, I've seen this not thousands, but many times with kids that I've taught, neurodivergent kids that I've taught. When they hit adulthood and they're in the real world, they thrive.
Yeah. Okay.
Because all of a sudden they have a modicum of freedom to be themselves and to make their own choices.
And autonomy,
Autonomy, yeah.
Especially for
And-
PDA. When,
Oh,
you know,
God,
like, your
absolutely,
PDA,
yes.
that is absolutely,
Yeah.
that's all they want, you know?
Yes,
And this is what
all
I'm
it
kind of
is.
hoping, that once they're free of the shackles of expectation of the education system, they're just
Yes.
going to go, right, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to crack
Yeah.
on and forge
Yeah.
ahead.
Absolutely.
And I feel optimistic that that's going to happen. Another thing in terms of the avoidance side of things is basically people pleasing. And avoiding conflict, I think, is a very big part of masking.
It is. I mean, you could argue that is fundamentally what masking is, couldn't you?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
It is people pleasing. It is presenting a version of you to the world that they will find acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I said earlier about it being a trauma response, and of course, fawning is a trauma response, isn't it? Along with fight, flight, freeze, flop. So yeah. I mean, I am a people pleaser through and through. I'm trying my best to kind of break that now, but that is my trauma response. And it's difficult. You know, you find it puts you in all kinds of very difficult situations where you just daren't spark a conflict. Basically, it makes you feel cowardly. You know, I feel cowardly because
Do you
of
what?
it, you
So
know,
at the time, or is it sort of you then get out of that situation and go, oh, what the fuck was I doing? I shouldn't have been up that tree.
Kind of both, really. Kind of both. You know, I feel bad during and I feel bad afterwards, you know, for not asserting myself in a more honest and realistic way, you know, because I'm desperately trying to avoid conflict. I'm desperately trying to stop that from happening. And that, I think, is a big thing for a lot of kids.
I think
you know,
Otto has that in particular. I think, you know, he goes with the flow. Partly, though, as well, he finds it difficult to make decisions. So that's another facet of it that is slightly... It's not masking in that sense of, like, he's just too late to actually come up with an idea, or he doesn't want the dysregulation of having to choose, because he's got this constant thing where if he chooses something, if it's wrong, he feels really bad, or if he feels like there's a better choice out there, he gets really overwhelmed. So it's not people pleasing in that sense. He just finds it easier to let other people make that decision for him.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, I mean, my daughter's like that. You know, we go in a toy shop and she'll buy a toy, and then afterwards it'll be like, oh God, did I get the right thing? Like, did I really?
I know.
Oh no, and it's heart wrenching to watch.
It is, yeah. So one strategy? I found this interesting. So Tam is my ex-partner, who is late diagnosed autistic. Always hated group situations, but would go along to the group situations, and I think partly used me as a social battering ram, because I would just go in and chat to anyone, and then Tam would go and find an interesting person to talk to in the corner, and that was how we got by, and that was all fine.
Yeah.
But now Tam is unmasking and understanding what they need. It's a very different situation, so they prefer to do activities. Right. This is a very kind of interesting autistic strategy. So they will go and do a thing with a person, and then the emphasis isn't on conversation, and it's not on socializing. It's on doing the thing, and the conversation and socializing is a byproduct of being in that place, sharing an experience with someone.
Yeah, I mean, I swear the only reason that I managed to cope with being in sixth form, you know, doing my A levels, was that my little friendship group somehow, I don't know how, because we were the nerds, but we got control of the darts room.
Oh, nice.
There was like a little darts room in the sixth form common room, because I went to Lincolnshire grammar school, because they're still free there for some reason. And yeah, we colonised the darts room, which meant that for the entire 2 years, every social occasion at break and lunchtime, we played darts. And that saved me. I genuinely believe that. That really helped me, because it meant that every time we were in that kind of break time, lunchtime situation, there was a structure, there was a game going on, there was something to do that wasn't just talking. So I absolutely agree with them on that. Like, that is, for me, a huge thing.
So this is, I think, definitely a thing with Jay, where he does Dungeons and Dragons. And that is very kind of, this is a social thing, but we're here for a reason, right?
Same with Warhammer. Yeah. It's great for that.
We all know why we're here. We'll just, we might converse around it, but, let's kill this orc.
Absolutely.
And Otto has a similar thing with football. He never showed any interest in football, and then he got like super into it, and plays it all the time. And that is again a social tool for him around that activity. So although it's not masking, it's sort of avoiding the need to mask, if you see what I mean.
It's a way of having that social time without it being quite so intense. And football's fascinating to me because it's such a blokey, masculine, social thing. But I reckon there are loads of hidden autistics within that football world.
Yeah.
Both fans and players genuinely believe that. I know that rumours abound about Lionel Messi being autistic.
Oh, really?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know whether it's ever been confirmed, but it's all, it's one of those kind of things that goes around.
That's what we need. That's what we need. A poster boy that everyone's he's already on people's walls,
yeah. Ready-made poster boy. I mean, I'm not in the business of armchair diagnosis by any stretch, so who knows? I don't even know much about the bloke, other than obvious massive talent and very focused.
Yeah.
But it's certainly something that I've noticed being rumoured around an awful lot. I think it's often overlooked because we associate football, in this country at least, with being highly sociable.
Yeah.
And therefore we don't tend to associate it with autism. But actually...
Oh, it's autistic.
Yeah.
People who are really into their facts and figures and statistics and, definitely.
If you walk into a bar and start talking about trains or Sonic the Hedgehog, everyone, even people who don't know much about it will be like, oh, a bit on the spectrum, are you? Whereas if you turn up and you start talking about, the record-breaking season when Leicester City won the Premier League, everyone's like, yeah, let's all sit down and talk about this then. Great stuff. It's so transparently... biased.
Exactly. It's a social shorthand that they don't have to actually think about anything else. Okay, one thing I wanted to talk about was how masking obviously is an autistic survival mechanism.
Yes.
It also, I think, affects ADHD. Which I don't know if it's talked about as often, I think, because as you were saying earlier, with my kids, they're ADHD and autistic, so where does one end and another one begin? You can't splice it and go, that's definitely an autistic trait, that's definitely an ADHD trait. So I was interested in, how it affects just ADHD.
Yeah, like with all masking, what you're doing is trying to present a more acceptable face to the world.
Yes.
So what you got to think about is those aspects of being ADHD which are unacceptable, to the population.
Yeah.
So, for example, I've noticed, and I do this, and a lot of ADHD people I know do this, we tend to mask our disorganisation.
Yeah.
We tend to try to present a face to the world which is fully on top of everything. It's the swan kind of analogy of the elegant swan with the feet beating furiously under the water.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of masking that I think a lot of ADHD people at least attempt to do.
Yes, definitely.
Because it is unacceptable to be always late, to be always forgetting things. I mean, full transparency here. As an autistic person, I'm not a big fan of lying, but I find that when I do lie, it's because of ADHD.
Okay, that's interesting.
Did you put the bins out? Yeah, I put the bins out. Shit. And then I'm running outside to put the bins out. It's to try to hide just how startlingly forgetful and disorganised I am. I will tell people that I've done things when I haven't done them. And then 9 times out of 10 get caught out in that because I'm crap at it. And it's just awful. And to me, that is a kind of masking.
It is. I think it is.
You're trying to hide something.
Present the fact that you're super organised and...
or at the very least, functional.
Yeah. I know that Tam just makes shitloads of lists. Just list after list after list.
I can't do that because I forget to look at the list.
Well, Tam is the converse of that, of Tam looks at the list to remember everything. Lives by the list. So a lack of a list is a big issue.
You kind of download your brain into... I can't do that. I don't like the feeling of that. I like it all to be up here.
Yeah.
But that's very flawed. I mean, I'm very lucky to be surrounded. My agent, my speaking agent, my literary agent are so patient with me.
Okay.
Which is lovely. But another way that ADHD people mask, I think, is much the same as some autistic people do this. We mask our enthusiasm and our energy levels. Certainly as we get older, because we recognise that our energy levels don't match others. We recognise that our enthusiasm for things don't maybe match other people.
That's
so we deaden ourselves slightly to appear not quite so hyper.
Yeah, I don't know if my kids are able to do that yet.
Yeah, maybe not.
Which, again, is part of the charm, I think, for them, and I love that. But I have also seen them in situations where they're right in someone's face and leaning into them and they're describing something with great
Yes.
detail.
And you're sitting there going, oh, my God.
Just give them a chance. Give them a
Calm
chance.
down. But I'm like that. Like, if you change the topic now and you wanted to talk about, like 90s video games, you'd see a change. I mean, I'm enthusiastic about talking about this stuff, don't get me wrong, but if I lock onto an old, really well-established special interest, I get told off for shouting.
We'll schedule a follow-up podcast about 90s video games. I'm all for that.
But no, I get told off for shouting because I get
really?
too passionate, and my voice goes higher. I get overexcited, and people like back because I'm quite a big bloke. I'm 6'7", I'm fairly broad. I'm a presence. So when I do that, if you're in a small room with me, I think it can be quite like whoa. Wow, that's a bit much, which I can understand, but I can't help it.
Yeah. So you find yourself
how I
masking
am.
it then in certain situations, and how the hell do you do that? You just like clenching your fist, going, "I really, really want to tell him how Sonic is shit compared to Mario, but you won't let me."
No. Hang on.
Sorry, I
Hang
said
on
the wrong one.
Well, no, I'm actually a connoisseur of both. I have no time for this fake
The rivalry, the Blur Oasis
dichotomy. Yeah, exactly. Yes. But no, you do. You clench your fists. You literally bite your tongue. You have to stop yourself because it's not acceptable, and it's hard. It's very hard.
And there's also, I find a lot of ADHD people make self-effacing jokes about it, like, "Oh, I'm just a bit scatterbrained," or I'm a bit ditzy, whatever it is. It's just like that's masking. You're trying to minimise actually what is a serious issue with you.
Absolutely, that's a good point. Yeah, you're managing expectations as well. But in a humorous, low stakes way. But unfortunately, experience teaches you that when push comes to shove, you can do all of that and you'll still disappoint. When you forget to do the thing for the 5th time, when you have to reschedule an appointment, you still irritate the people around you, which is hard. It's hard to, knowing that you are annoying people is really hard, I find.
Another hot topic in the whole thing with masking is, does it seem to be more prevalent in girls? And this is a tricky one because obviously masking is prevalent in male and non-binary individuals and everyone along that kind of gender identity spectrum. But research does suggest that it is more prevalent with females, and I'm interested in why that is, because from my perspective, India used to mask a lot. And it's only now we're sort of having a bit more of an insight into her neurotype, and crucially that she sees everyone else unmasking as like, oh, great, I'll just crack on with what they're doing. That she's able to unmask not just at home but now at school a lot more. But India was the one that I didn't spot for ages.
Well, you and the rest of humanity. I mean, that's how it goes, isn't it? Women and girls have just flown under the radar for so many reasons. And some of the reasons are due to poor diagnostic criteria and, lack of knowledge amongst medical staff. But certainly, I can't speak from experience, obviously, but certainly a lot of the literature does point to the idea that for whatever reason, autistic girls and women are kind of socially forced to mask more than men. I can see it from a male point of view. From my own limited male point of view, I do believe that to be an eccentric man or boy is arguably more acceptable than being an eccentric girl, especially at school age. Yeah, like I say, I can't speak for that demographic, but I do think there might be some truth behind that, whereby the pressure to conform or the pressure to fit in and blend in is far greater, perhaps. Yeah, there are definitely outdated societal gender expectations, I think. That girls are encouraged to play in a different way, not to kind of do rough and tumble with the boys, but do more imaginative play, and they're encouraged to be quieter. Like girls are called bossy if they have an opinion, for example. Indeed. So again, I mean, and this is probably a whole different podcast, not just around neurodivergency, but around kind of gender absolutely expectations. But I can see why, if they try and unmask and then they're sort of put in a box, not just because of their neurotype but because of their gender, as well, if that's not how girls do things, which is bullshit, by the way, and something that we've never been sort of ascribed to in my
family, you know, it's always been you do what you want to do, really. But in school, I don't think they're as progressive yet.
No. I've read a lot over the years about, and you know, I know something about the idea of emotional labour and the fact that women are expected to carry the emotional labour of, say, a relationship, because the man can't, because, well, I say can't, won't, because we're not socialised that way. And I think that it's a bit similar to that. It's like, it's this expectation that basically the women, the girls in any given situation, they are the ones that are going to carry the burden of whatever the burden is. And in this case, it's the burden of masking, because masking is a burden, as we'll soon talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's therefore kind of related to that. But, you know, as I say, anyone assigned female at birth who's listening to this, who wants to chime in the comments or whatever on social media, please do, because, you know, I come at this from a very different perspective.
Yeah, I am interested. Yeah, absolutely. If you do want to respond with anything, you can email hello@neuroshambles.com.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear other perspectives of it. Well, you don't know this, but when this podcast started, which was about 18 months ago, I thought that India was neurotypical. I described my setup as having 2 neurodivergents and a suspected neurotypical, I think is what how I described her. And through the course of this podcast, my understanding of India has changed and evolved. And so now it's like, she's definitely autistic.
Yes.
Like, definitely autistic. And it's been quite interesting to see that almost emerging from a cocoon with India, in that she's so eccentric now, and like wonderfully so, at school as well as at home. She's really, because we don't encourage masking in the house, you know, she's often found sitting in a box reading, or
nice.
And there's this thing when she goes into school now, she hates wearing coats. There's a big sensory issue around wearing coats, so she now has this brightly coloured poncho, which is the thing we've managed to settle on. And then sometimes she goes in a fedora as well. So she looks absolutely amazing, but very different from everyone else. But is unmasked, and I think that's something that fills me with a lot of joy. I think that she's able to do that now.
Absolutely.
Whereas before, when she was in infant school, I went on a school trip with her, and we were at the back of the bus having a laugh and a joke, and her teacher came over and said, "Oh, who is this girl? This is not the India that I recognise."
Yes.
Because we were just titting about basically and having a laugh, and she was being eccentric and being funny, and the teacher was like, this is really interesting to see how different she is, because she's fully masked at school. So that was quite interesting to see how different it could be.
I mean, it's the same with me and my daughter. You know, when I'm driving her to school in the mornings, we have noise making competitions. We just make these bizarre noises at one another for pretty much the entire journey, or we kind of sing nonsense songs at each other. You know, you know, silly lyrics that we make up on the spot. I mean, I've been doing that for years. You know, I've been doing that. That's been a thing for me through my whole life. But yeah, you know, we are silly. We are very, very, very silly. And I think, if her teachers were to see that, they'd be surprised too. Because at school, she wants to just do things properly, do it right, do it well. You know, be a kind of good example. She's very, you know, very upstanding in the school, and I think they'd be surprised to see how subversive she can be.
This is it. Yeah, it's interesting that I think a lot of neurotypicals can't perceive what that unmasking looks like. I had like yesterday a really weird thing where I accidentally left a voice message for my brother. So he had a 2-minute window into a car journey with me in Otto in India, and he sent it to me and he went, "Oh, it's really weird, they do transcripts of phone conversations." Right. And we basically spent 2 minutes trying to work out a good name for a monkey.
Nice. Yeah, that's the kind of thing.
It was very heated, and there was some absolutely fucking hilarious ones. But for someone else to have a little window into that was both mortifying and sort of slightly uplifting to think, my life isn't, you know, a lot of the time I talk about on this podcast, a lot of the challenges. And I think people can think, it's just hard all the time and it's drudgery. It's not, because there are some just moments of absolute unfettered joy. And
for sure.
And he's just had a little window into that. And I'm quite happy about that.
Yeah.
So obviously, masking, we can understand why kids do it. And
Yeah.
we can understand what they do in order to survive in these social situations. What we haven't discussed yet is the repercussions of that.
Indeed,
The emotional baggage that comes with masking.
Yeah.
Because it causes significant problems, I think, in the long term.
It does, yes, yeah. Significant mental health problems, primarily. There is the more immediate exhaustion, that can't be understated. It is incredibly tiring, and that takes its toll. That can lead to burnout, of course, autistic burnout, which is a very unpleasant thing to experience. But compared to depression, is at least something that you can work on and you can kind of get better from. It can also lead to depression, though, and depression is far scarier. It leads to depression, I think, because you are very aware of how unwanted you are.
Right, okay.
Of how unacceptable your true self is. And even if that's not a conscious thought, it's still there. Even for kids, like a knowledge that your own real being is not right in some way.
It's not acceptable to others.
That does a number on your mental health, on your sense of self, on your confidence, on your self-assurance. It really damages all of them. And that's before you even start thinking about the more kind of psychological issue of how it affects your actual personality.
Yes.
Like many autistic adults, for example, talk about not really knowing who they are anymore because you've taken on a persona, you've worn a mask for so long that, I don't know.
You have to strip it back because how much of it is masking? I mean, that's been a huge thing for Tam as a late diagnosed autistic going, well, who actually am I?
Yeah.
And having to sort of unpick that a little bit. And
well, I mean, I figured out that so much of myself was actually masking to try and fit in, from my favourite music to games I played to places I like to go. Often it was just a people-pleasing response. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be liked.
So how do you then rebuild that? That's the
from the ground up. From the ground up. I've
expose
had to
yourself to all of the music and go. Actually, I'm quite into the Spice Girls. It turns out.
Well, and just allow yourself that. Recently, I've decided I want to write some ghost stories. I'm a writer. I've got an agent. I can do that if I want to. But I had to fight myself to do this because part of me felt like I wasn't allowed to write ghost stories. Now, I can't explain that in any greater detail. I just didn't feel like I was allowed to.
Right, okay.
Because I would enjoy it.
Oh, okay.
And I felt a realization that actually part of my masking through the years has been so corrosive to my sense of self that I now associate things I enjoy with things I shouldn't do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not like, illegal things or things that are actually bad for you, like drugs or alcohol or anything like that. It's more benign than that. It's just things that I like, that I just don't feel justified to do because I have to put other people first and I can't trust myself. I can't trust my own wanting to do things because I've been told throughout my entire life that there's something fundamentally wrong with me.
Like we can see what the issues are with late diagnosed autism and that you're unpicking decades of masking, essentially, to work out fundamentally who you are. I'm very hopeful that because we have more awareness early on with our kids and we're advocating for them to be authentic and to follow their special interests and indulge the things that are going to bring them joy, that we're going to have significantly less unpicking to do.
I hope so.
Because you're unpicking a year or two and that it's not going to be such a seismic thing to unpack this loss of self.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that with our kids, the more aware we are early on of masking and the more we give them the ability to remove that mask, the less damaging it is in the long term, I think.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And obviously there will always be an element of masking going forward as well. But if you understand what you're doing and if you know that that's what it is and you know to be wary of it and don't over rely on it, then it's much safer. It becomes a tool
Yes.
rather than a cage.
It's code switching again.
Exactly.
Like
yes.
I really like the idea that they can do that and they can employ it.
Yes, on their own terms.
Yeah. And I know that Jay, even though he doesn't mask, and I'd quite like him to learn those strategies, I think over time, I think he will. I've seen sort of little signs of it once. Because like when my parents come over, he will be very polite and he'll talk to them like solidly for like 10 minutes and be incredibly charming. And then he'll just fuck off and we won't see him for the rest of the time.
Yes.
But it's like, I'm done. But I know he can do it. So that fills me with hope that he's going to be able to do more of that in other social situations, I think, over time. But it is a learned behaviour. And I think you can only do that if you have the capacity. And if you are exhausted from masking the rest of the time, then you don't have the capacity to put it on anymore, which is why our kids very often will explode when they get home.
Exactly. Well, absolutely.
That social exhaustion of like the amount of stuff they're having to hold in their brains and the amount of effort and processing power it takes to get through a day to survive. As soon as they come home, they don't have the capacity to do it anymore.
No.
And that's when it all
It's
comes
too much.
out.
Yeah. It's too much. You know, we don't have infinite energy. No. In fact, you know, we often have quite a lot less, especially if, you know, we're dealing with pain or whatever other co-occurring issues. But that's exactly it. So we have to be really mindful about all of this. We have to be mindful of the fact that it is not sustainable. You know, there has to be safe havens where we can go to unmask. We have to have those. You know, we have to have places where we can easily access, whether it's our bedrooms or our car, you know, or anywhere, a room in a school, where we can just let it all hang out and be a bit more ourselves. Ideally around other people, but even if it's alone, that's better than nothing.
It's not all rubbish.
So the positives, because I think there are instances where masking is helpful, as we've discussed, you know, it's a pretty handy self-preservation tool that you can, you know, in your little box of tools that you can then bust out when you need to, if you're invited to a fancy function or something like that, or you feel like it's worth doing it for a particular social engagement, then it's good to have that tool. I think the key is learning to unmask rather than learning to mask. It's learning what is safe, where is safe, and what that looks like.
It is, yeah. If that's possible, you know, for some people, unmasking can be very difficult. For other people, it can be tremendously unsafe, of course. You know, I mean, one thing to always bear in mind is just how much masking keeps us safe, especially if you are in a situation or a setting where being different is even more dangerous than it is, for example, in the UK. You know, like we talk, I mean, I remember talking in my book about the experience of some Black American teenagers, you know, being unapologetically autistic in the street and getting shot for their troubles.
Right, yes.
You know, because they are part of a demographic that the police view in a very different way. Let's just put it like that.
Yeah.
Which means that any behaviour out of the norm is seen as threatening. I mean, it shouldn't be, but it's seen as threatening by the police, and they respond the way they do over there. It's a tricky concept because it's a lifesaver, you know, and I think it's important that people who do mask remember that, remember not to unmask lightly. You know, same in work. You know, if you're at work as an autistic adult, unmasking could be the last thing you do in that job.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Of course. Unless you work for a Dutch company.
Indeed, yeah. But if you're a kid, you know, in a school, then the more you can unmask, the better, and it gets you into some good habits of being then able to unmask. Because I don't know whether I even can anymore. Yeah. I don't think I can. I think it's too ingrained. But if you learn as a kid to be able to do it, that's going to set you up well for life.
And this is the thing that as parents is the one hugely important thing that we can offer our kids is the ability for them to unmask at home
and feel safe
feel safe and be accepting. And sometimes that's difficult. It's difficult because it manifests in rudeness and aggression sometimes, or you know, emotional, or being too full on and demanding your attention to unleash that special interest. But the best thing we can do, and I'm not saying that I do this well all the time at all, but it's just to give them that space and that understanding to know that that's what's going on. Yeah. And it's really important for them to do that, to be able to, you know, to reconnect with their authentic selves, I think.
Yeah. A non-judgmental space where they know that they will not be viewed poorly. for being themselves. I mean, I sometimes say to my daughter, just please stop, shush, shush, shush. It's too, because I'm autistic too. I get overwhelmed by the noise.
Yeah.
But I preface it, or at least I add to it, what you are doing is not bad. I just can't deal with it personally right now. And she can deal with that better than me just saying, stop it, this is bad,
Yeah.
So it's about just being mindful about how you approach it.
Yeah. Another positive I wanted to kind of bring to light, which I've touched on a bit, is but just seeing my kids unmasked is an enormous source of joy to me. Because our house is not for the faint-hearted. It's it's absolutely bonkers. But you walk into our house and you'll find one kid is hanging upside down on the gorilla gym reading a book, and one is sat in a box, and the other one is repeatedly smashing their face into the cushions on the sofa because they like the sensory input. And you would walk into neurotypical will walk into this and go, what the hell is going on here? But they are full of joy, and it fills me with a lot of pleasure to see my kids like that and to understand where that comes from and to not try and dampen that down, because I think in the early days of my parenting journey I'd spent a lot of time almost encouraging them to mask, being in that situation, going, shh, stay still, stay with me, look at me, give them a hug, all of that shit, because I don't want the dissonance. Not about them. It's about me. And that's been the hardest thing for me to learn as a parent, but also the most beneficial, is learning that actually that's my expectations that I need to drop, not theirs. And I feel like we're in a place now where we are joyfully weird in our house. And that's it. At Christmas, India said, I want to get a Christmas tree that is wonky. I was like, why? And she went, because that suits our family. I don't want like a perfect tree in our house. I was like, that's good. Okay. So I went and asked the Christmas tree seller for the wonkiest tree he had, and he had to go out back for it. Didn't give me a reduction on the price, but but we got what we wanted.
Neurodiversity champions.
Okay, so neurodiversity champions now. This is the section of the podcast where we kind of talk about anyone that we want to champion who are doing amazing things in the world of neurodiversity. Have you got anyone that you want to sort of draw our attention to?
I mean, I always like to put a shout out to the Autistic Girls Network, just with being a parent to an autistic girl. Kathy does some fantastic work. It's a full-fledged charity. It provides excellent resources. The website's easy to find because it's just Autistic Girls Network. And I just always tend to direct people to it because it's great for parents, especially parents of autistic girls, but also boys. I mean, it's not totally exclusive. So I would always recommend people take a look at that. It's really, really good stuff.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I've got one which I think you'll approve of, and this is Lego.
Oh, of course.
Because Lego are very neurodivergent friendly.
They are.
It would seem. And was one that we mentioned a while ago, is that they created soundtracks for people to listen to when they were building Lego that are sort of calming, and they understand, the impact that building Lego has on the neurodivergent brain, which is fascinating. Tam is really into Lego because it's like creativity, but with a framework. With a structure.
Absolutely, which is why I like it, yes.
But Lego have now released minifigures with sunflower lanyards.
They have.
Did you know that? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's part of their real push for true diversity. There are... I remember when they first started introducing, for example, Lego figures with wheelchairs, Lego figures with crutches and things like that. But now there are Lego figures with cochlear implants, and who have different limbs and vitiligo and all kinds of things. They really are very, very hot. It's great to see. And the sunflower lanyards, it's hard to get to show autistic minifigures.
Yeah, of course,
an invisible disability. But the sunflower lanyards does it. But they're also including it as part, because like Lego Friends, for example, has like cartoons and stuff alongside. And I think they're being quite explicit in those in terms of neurodivergence. Not anything else. Horrible thought.
Lego Friends with benefits.
God. Oh no! Oh, it's ruined.
Sorry,
but absolutely.
Tiny epic wins.
So, tiny epic wins now. These are the moments that neurotypicals find, pretty bog standard in their lives, but for us are epic wins. Do you have any tiny epic wins that you can share with us?
Her thing last week was to advocate for a fiddle toy, something to mess with. She said to me that, and her mum, she said to both of us that she didn't find it very fair that even though she's undiagnosed, she still doesn't get to have these accommodations, which I thought was...
This is in school?
Yeah.
Okay, so did she make that petition to the teachers then?
She did, yeah,
Amazing.
Successfully. She's now allowed to use fiddle toys, and she believes, and she says to me that she thinks it helps her a great deal to have that, and was given one, which for her is a huge win.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, good job. I got a tiny epic win, which is that I played Jay at chess.
Oh, nice.
And he likes chess. He loves playing chess. I've played it quite a few times, but I won. And it's the first time he ever acknowledged that I'd got checkmate against him. Because normally he'll make shit up, like the king becomes the ninja king and kicks all the pawns over, or flies off, so it's the first time he has ever acknowledged that it's a checkmate. And he walked out the room straight away, and then went and told India and Otto that he'd won.
Right. Okay.
so
one step forward, two steps back.
Didn't admit it to them, but crucially, he admitted it to me and to himself that's what happened.
Yeah,
and that was
that's good.
That was a huge win. It didn't result in any meltdown or anger. He just went off to do something else.
Makes games far more fun, doesn't it?
Oh god, yeah.
Until you get to that point, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
What the flip?
Okay, what the flip moments now. These are the moments that the interactions that you'll have with your neurodivergent child where they'll say or do something that completely baffles you and you don't really know how to respond. Do you have any what the flip moments?
Yeah, a big one for me recently has been the issue of choice regret. Recently, with having some Christmas money to spend, still kind of kicking about since Christmas from grandparents and things, whenever I have my daughter and we go to the toy shop in town, there's often a kind of tenner that she can spend. And, increasingly, she is finding it more and more difficult to actually choose something to get. She is fearful of the feeling of regret. She's terrified of it because I think she recognises how bad it feels. And I think she also has something similar to what I've got, which is pity for the unwanted item.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I
it's
remember,
been left alone on the shelf. Toy Story's got a lot to answer for, man.
Well, yeah, I remember writing, when I was writing my first book, What I Want to Talk About, I talked a lot about the empathy for inanimate objects that many autistic people have. And what I've discovered my daughter seems to be doing, at first I viewed it as a spoiled thing. Like she was spoiled. She'd buy something and be dissatisfied. And I'd be like, oh, for goodness sake, you just bought something. Now I realise it's much deeper than that. Yeah. She'll buy something and then she'll be petrified that she's made the wrong choice. She'll be feeling empathy for the thing she left behind, but she'll also be feeling empathy for the thing that she's got.
Right.
And I have this myself, and this is why I was able to put two and two together, because she feels bad for the fact she's not 100% happy with that item.
Oh god, that's so...
And therefore, whatever it is, whether it's a Sylvanian Families toy or a bit of Lego or a doll or a T-wife plushy thing, she feels sad for the fact that she doesn't want it as much as she thought she did. Yeah. So in her head, that's an unwanted... And honestly, thinking about it, I could burst into tears.
It is heartbreaking,
It's so sad, but it's also so rich.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
I think we have a tendency to simplify kids' behaviour and to think that it's driven by very basic instincts when it's not often.
That's really interesting because Otto has this and I think I probably simplify it a little bit when, there's probably a lot more going on there than I realised.
Yeah. So, that was an interesting thing that really made me think, made me view her behaviour very differently, to be honest. Yeah.
I mean, my what the flip moments from Jay don't often make me think deeply. They're usually just like, what the fuck are you talking about? So I had a conversation with him about the plans for the day, and as I was leaving his room, he said aloud to himself, smells like unimportant beans.
Okay.
So I stopped leaving the room and I went, what does that mean? And he went, it's a metaphor for something, I don't know.
Yeah.
It just needed to say a thing, I think.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
Another one is that we went to this kind of playground thing and he ran up to me and he went, that slide is so fast it curdled my urine.
Oh, that is brilliant.
It's like,
That is brilliant. It's really interesting because my daughter will do that. Like, she came up to me the other day and I said something that I liked something. I can't remember what it was. And she just said to me, yeah, you fellas, you like that stuff, don't you guys? Oh, you're such a... And I was like, what? She sounded like a 1930s guy in a pub, like really kind of like, oh, you like that kind of thing, don't you? Oh, blooming heck. It was so weird. And I loved it because there is something very unique sometimes about the way that autistic people explore language. And I think that's what's going on there. They recognise the possibilities and they are running with it.
And it's really playful. I like that's what I like about it.
And imaginative and weird.
Yeah. So my final example with Jay is we went to a therapy session with him, and we went in there, and he's been there before, but he walked in and went, ugh, it smells like cigarettes and bad choices in here.
Oh, that's brilliant as well. That's very good.
He's like a noir writer, isn't he?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for this episode of Neuroshambles. Firstly, Pete, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experiences. Obviously, I mentioned your book, Untypical, which I've just finished listening to, and it's wonderful. I love it. It's I think you sort of pitched it as almost like a way of translating neurodivergent for neurotypicals, and it does a really great job of that. Do you want to just talk about the other books that you've done and maybe the ghost stories that you've got in the pipeline?
Yeah, well, my first book that came out about 6 months before Untypical did is What I Want to Talk About, which is all about my special interests as a kid. And each chapter focuses on a different special interest, but it also takes the opportunity to explain autism through a particular lens. So my chapter on dinosaurs, for example, which was a very early special interest of mine, also touches on family, the role of family in an autistic person's life, for reasons that you'll understand when you read it. So that's the idea. The whole teaching by stealth thing is very much going on in that book.
Right, okay.
I'm working on my third book currently. That's with publishers now. It's all about education. It's autism and education. So waiting to see if publishers want that. Hopefully they will.
You've got a fantastic insight into that, though, obviously.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, and I've got the social media following. I don't know. Publishers are funny beings. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah, okay.
But I want to move into fiction, so I'm messing around with ideas now for some ghost stories because I love ghosts. I think that whole world is something that I'm fascinated by. I don't really believe in them, sadly. I used to. I think my belief in them has been shaken by years and years of just not seeing any decent evidence at all. But I love the idea of it. I wish they existed. I deeply wish they existed. and so I want to kind of throw my hat into that genre a little bit. So that's going to be a way off, though.
Look forward to that. So if people want to kind of check out your stuff on your website, I'll include that in the show notes as well. I will also just say a massive thank you to all of the people for listening and for continuing to support Neuroshambles and write in lovely comments on the socials. And if you want to email us, as I mentioned before, if you want to send us an email about any topics that you want us to discuss, then you can send that into hello@neuroshambles.com, or you can contact us on the socials on Instagram or Facebook or Threads or TikTok. That's it. So all that remains for me to say is have a nice life.